Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is Cost Objective or KJ. I am the Director of Product Marketing here at SafeReach, and I wanted to thank each and every one of you who took the time to attend our interactive session today. Before we get started, just want to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared with all the registrants and attendees after the event is complete. It will also be available on our website for you to review it at any point of time or share it with anyone else whom you think you may have missed it. At any given point of time, if you do have any questions, please do use the Q&A function of Zoom webinars to share that with us. We will be answering all the questions during the Q&A session after the demo period is complete. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started. The SafeReach platform is intended to provide security teams with a holistic point of view that ties into your business risk. And we enable you to replicate a hacker's mindset so that you can continuously validate the efficacy of your security controls against the latest threats. We help you quickly understand what your attack surface would look like and which threats pose the greatest challenge for your security posture and your organization. And this is essentially what we're going to focus on today's webinar. So today's webinar is choosing the right or correct security tool for your organization. This entirely focuses on, there's a plethora of security tools that's available in the market today. Which of these makes the most sense for you? If you have multiple ones, can you eliminate anything, or which one should you put your focus and energy behind? Our speakers today, other than me, I just introduced myself, is one of our rock stars. He is Francisco. He's our sales engineering manager for the Americas region. And he's been in the company now in the second stint, probably 2 years at this point. But prior to that, another year and a half. So he's probably close to 4 years at this point. He will be kind of walking us through the actual capability, how you would actually run these tests to verify which security control and why you would choose a particular security control. I'm not going to go over the agenda. Just a quick brief overview of who SafeReach is. We are the pioneers in the breach and attack simulation or BAS space. We do have a very dedicated, world-renowned, and very awarded and distinguished research and development team based out of our Israel R&D office. They not only focus on providing coverage for the latest attacks, but they do original research that helps them find vulnerabilities in existing security controls. We add coverage to that, making our overall coverage more robust. We do have the largest attack playbook, close to 30,000 attacks at this point of time. We are the only breach and attack simulation vendor that provides a 24-hour SLA for any key pertinent attacks that are identified in attack IOCs and TTPs that are identified in US CERT, FBI Flash, or other critical attacks. We do have the widest MITRE attack coverage because MITRE is a language that is spoken across security teams around the world. We do provide multiple ways and flexible ways of being able to communicate the results of your findings or the insights with your key stakeholders, including up the chain from your security analysts as well as board members, CISOs, any security executives. And lastly, we don't just attack your security controls to identify the gaps. We provide you with actionable remediation data, and with our vast, the largest integration ecosystem, you can easily share those remediation insights with the security controls or the teams managing those security controls. That way, you can easily detect threats, reduce your mean time to detect and mean time to remediate, providing a much more efficient and effective SOC operation. So the question for today's webinar, as I mentioned earlier, why compare security tools? Essentially, you could potentially be in a situation where you could have some legacy tools. And in this particular case, we're just going to take EDRs as an example. You could potentially have an organization that multiple business units across the world could have multiple EDR tools. Now, each of them have their own configurations, and how do you determine which tool is best for the overall organization? Should we continue spending money in upgrading each and every tool, because it could be a much larger cost than just upgrading a single thing? So how do you determine which is the best tool for your organizational risk tolerance? Because if you're a financial services, say for example, financial services or healthcare industry, which tool would be the best for you based on your specific business risk and your overall business risk? Because these particular verticals, or any vertical for that matter, do carry certain critical crown jewel information that you don't want to get out, you don't want to get breached. So how do you determine which security controls, not just EDRs, are the best for your organization? And then if you do have multiple tools, how do you determine which tool can consistently provide you a good amount of coverage? I'm not saying every tool will provide you perfect coverage across every single attack, but which tool can provide you best coverage across a multitude of attacks, not just a particular phishing attack, or not just a particular ransomware attack, but a wide variety of attacks across multiple threat groups or multiple TTPs and MOCs. And if you have, so that's one thing, that why you should compare your existing security tools to determine which is the best for your organization. The next thing is, if you have a certain set of rules and policies that you have in place, probably also because of compliance purposes, how do you ensure that these policies, the tools that you currently own, are actually standing up to these policies? And how do you, and if there are changes, which one can take in or affect the policies the best? If you decide to change any misconfigurations or update any security tools, which of these tools can withstand the best change and still provide you the same level of coverage? And lastly, again, as I was kind of referring to in the very beginning, eliminating tool bloat. You don't want to have 10 different types of 10 different tools of the same category trying to protect your organization, because each of them can affect your organizational posture in a different manner. Each of them could have gaps that could easily be exploited. Instead, you much rather have one or two tools that you really trust, and you want to put your entire effort behind in ensuring that they provide you the best level of coverage to protect your organization. So kind of quickly going over, what's the best methodology or the best practice we recommend for security control comparison using SafeBreach. And again, you could either run it based on what you feel is appropriate. Here are just some recommendations. First, if you want to run a apples to apples comparison, you need to identify what is the scope of the test. You can't possibly think of running all, in our case, 30,000 attacks to see what is the best, but focus on what is the attacks that can cause you the most business risk. You can identify that, as use that as a baseline. Then you can deploy appropriate simulators. Simulators, again, agents in the most vulnerable network segments that you determine are the most critical for your business. And obviously, you set up connections with your security controls or the tools that you're trying to compare with SafeBreach. And then you can either choose to run specific groups of attacks, which is what scenarios that I'm showing here on my screen, or you could choose individual attacks. Again, it all depends on what your testing is about. You can run these attacks and review these results. Now, I don't want to take too much time in just going over slides. I'm going to switch over to Francisco right now, who's going to quickly walk you through this entire process and how easy it is to understand how you can compare your security controls. Over to you, Francisco.
Thanks, KJ. So I'm pulling up the demo. I'll just touch on a few things that KJ mentioned. They're really important to keep in mind when you're using a platform like SafeBreach to automate your testing. Scalability is a big aspect of attack simulation, and being able to scale executions across different security controls to be able to make that comparison in a timely manner is really important. SafeBreach provides the ability to run multiple tests in parallel, so that results in a shortened amount of time needed to provide the output to make the decisions based on the data. It's also really important to note that consistency is a key as well. So being able to run the attacks in a way that is consistent across the different security controls, depending on the end goal. You might want to understand if a particular security control that has maybe different modules enabled has the best policy deployed by default, or if it requires tuning. So being able to run a test in the same way over and over again, and being able to do that across different systems is really important. And of course, having the flexibility of being able to choose what tests to run, because as KJ mentioned, maybe not every tool has all of the capabilities, or maybe its focus might differ between one tool or another. Some security controls, particularly on the endpoint, may not necessarily focus on IOCs, and they're more behavioral based. And so you might want to be able to pick and choose what attacks you run, or potentially, filter out different attacks results within the visualizations within the reporting. So to get to a better apples to apples comparison whenever possible. So with that said, I'm going to walk through a couple of scenarios. I'm going to show you how you stage the different attack campaigns and how we execute them, and then how we look at that output again to drive change and potentially, adjust architectures or make informed decisions about current investments or future investments. So in the platform, everything starts with running attacks. Attacks are run against simulators in your environment. Those simulators, for security tool comparison purposes, would have the different tools that you might want to focus on. So, in the example that I'll show, we'll be focusing on endpoint controls. So we'll have some simulators that are running Palo Alto Cortex XDR, some that are running Defender, maybe Silence and CrowdStrike. But you're going to want to configure your simulators in a platform, and make sure that the security controls and the default policies that are running on those controls are set up as you'd expect. Then we'll navigate over to the scenario view. So onto the attack icon, we can choose from different scenarios to trigger our executions. And those scenarios can be focused around a specific validation scenario. So it could be, in this case, we're focusing on endpoint, and that endpoint validation could consist of multiple attack types, but we can also drill in a little bit deeper into the endpoint itself and maybe just run attacks that are focused on signature IOC driven attacks, as well as behavioral attacks. Or if we want to run executions that are only focused on credential harvesting techniques, we can zero in on things like script execution at the endpoint as well. Or we can focus on full ransomware assessments across the different endpoints. So it's important to note the scope of testing, understanding what you want to accomplish out of the test, what you want to put, maybe the security controls through different paces. If you're looking for a full kill chain view, the different attack vectors that the endpoint might have visibility into, for example, EDRs might be able to see, when different activity at the network level is taking place. And so maybe you want to use initial downloads, and second stage downloaders, lateral movement as part of the evaluation. Or, if you're focused on controls that don't have that capability, maybe you want to pare that back and maybe just focus on IOC behavior, drop to disk, execution of payloads. The key point here is that there's a lot of flexibility in how you run these attacks. And so again, if we want to just focus on script execution at the endpoint, I would just click on the scenario, and the scenario provides me a simple step with some basic script execution attacks associated with those. So the scenarios have predefined attacks already built in, and it's very simple for you to then just simply click on the scenario in the scenario configuration view. and add the simulator targets that you're going to want to run the attacks against. There's a few different ways to do this. We can select specifically just one set of simulators, or we can go across the top and select all the simulators that we want to test. And the platform will automatically determine which attacks are applicable against which simulators based on the role that the simulators have been assigned based on the OS type. So script execution attacks on Windows are not going to run on Linux and vice versa. So we'll figure that out. And when we get the green check mark, we're good to go. We can go ahead and schedule this. So we can run this, daily, weekly, monthly, once. We can run it on demand as well, just clicking the run button here, or we could save it as a scenario, call it all simulators, for example. Or, we can go to the scenario and adjust the simulators and only select, maybe the ones that are relevant to our test. So, I can select my CrowdStrike simulator, and I can have my silence simulator, and I can choose my XDR, and I can do this. So the ability to filter for different targets is fairly easy here. And again, the platform is going to determine which attacks are applicable, and we can go ahead and click save and run. So having performed the scenario configuration, we can now begin to look at what the output of these simulations look like. So from an execution standpoint, as you'll see in the dashboard here, we've got some scenarios that have already completed. For the goal of the demo, we're going to dive into some of these, and we're also going to look at high-level dashboards that are outputted. I'm going to focus on endpoint attacks in this case. So I can just filter here for anything that's endpoint related. And, we can click in and see which particular attacks are being executed in this, as well as which controls are reporting. Depending on the attacks and the scenarios that you're setting up, you might want to create multiple scenarios. So I might create a scenario that runs the same attacks against my CrowdStrike simulator and run a scenario against my XDR simulator. And so I might be cloning different scenarios and running them in parallel again here. Cloning scenarios is super simple. So when you've set up the scenarios and they've been saved, it's as simple as clicking on a scenario and duplicating it, adjusting it. You can do that from outside without clicking in as well. So we can go ahead and click clone scenario and select the simulators that I want to participate here and rename this scenario. But again, the idea is that you're creating multiple scenarios to run the executions in a consistent way, taking advantage of the scalability of the platform to run those tests in parallel across the different simulators in the environment. Once we have the data, we pivot over to dashboards to report. So in the dashboards, we're going to be able to visualize the results. The individual results are all carried over from the executions, and you can always get to the low-level details of an attack by clicking into a dashboard component and drilling in and seeing the evidence from the controls. In this case, Cortex is able to prevent discovery of remote systems using PowerShell. And, that's the evidence that we need for this particular attack. This attack is part of a broader set of attacks that are associated with those scenarios. So scenarios are the collection of attacks that are aligned with a specific testing criteria and goal. We can use different dashboards. The platform has some built in, and it's really simple to adjust these. Each individual widget can be adjusted. We have built-in dashboards for security control validation, of course, and we can use these as starting points to start to drill in and compare the data. So, for example, the security control validation dashboard here is showing us tests that have been run against Palo Alto. And we can see that there's different criteria that we're measuring, right? In Palo Alto, you might have URL filtering turned on, you might have threat prevention, the IPS component that's going to help us with segmentation, validation, and attacks. And so we can do that comparison. For our scenario here, when we're focusing on endpoints, we can use a dashboard that's built with widgets that are focused just on that. We can use the additional filters here at the top to select the scenarios that we want to focus on. And so those could be just straight up baseline, or rather endpoint scenarios. And I can select, behavioral. So if I only want to focus on behavioral attacks, or if I just want to focus on drop to disk attacks, I can go ahead and select the scenarios that are relevant to my focus. And when I do that, I'm limiting the view. So super simple to start to craft the comparisons based on the different capabilities of the security controls. We can drill into the security controls as well. So if you wanted to just focus on CrowdStrike as an example, we can do filtering at the widget level, as well as at the report level. So clicking on a category of a widget, we can now filter the entire set of results here and focus only on CrowdStrike. So you're able to compare not just each control against other controls that you may have inherited or actively evaluating, in your organization, but you're also able to compare, how a particular control is performing against maybe a specific attack type. So, again, knowing that CrowdStrike by default does not really care if you're writing malware to disk. Maybe we just want to focus on code execution. Maybe we want to focus on credential abuse, and see how CrowdStrike is doing there, right? And focus on the capabilities that we know out of the box CrowdStrike is going to be able to go after. Now, if you turn on, say, a file watcher service on CrowdStrike, and now you want to measure drop to disk, you can go ahead and do that and then simply select the data. And what the platform allows you to do is provide widgets here that allow you to insert free-form text in order to provide context to how the tests are being performed, why the results are the way they are. And so, again, for your organization, as you're making the tool selection, as you're rationalizing, what tool should fit where in the architecture, given its capabilities, you can start to document that here and then provide this empirical evidence to, different stakeholders in the environment. Use this to make strategic decisions or even tactical decisions about what you might shift in the architecture, or what default policies are acceptable and what might need to be tweaked out of the box. So that is effectively how you take the scenarios and you begin to drill into the high level views. As I mentioned, all the data here is supported by the individual attacks themselves. And so if we're talking about script execution, being able to perform that, you get down to the low level details of the attack, what is being used as far as the commands that are being run. Of course, everything's mapped to MITRE, as we mentioned earlier. Largest coverage of MITRE in the industry today. Simulation logs. So what's happening? What are we waiting for validation from the control, and the evidence that's coming in from the control all being pulled in to into the platform. So via integrations with the security vendors, we're able to pull in the evidence of the attack and then parse the data, correlate it, provide a final status, and then use all of that to roll up into these visualizations to help support your narrative. KJ, with that, I think I'll pause to see if there are any questions from the audience.
Thanks, Francisco, for that enlightening demo. So please, for the audience members, if you do have any questions, kindly do submit it via the Q&A functionality. I did receive one question right here. I think it's pertaining to M&A process. So the question is, can this approach be used during the M&A vetting process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously during M&A, there's a function of risk and understanding, what impact that acquisition might have, as far as integrations, how much risk you're absorbing. You're doing a lot of this doing via paper exercises and auditing and interviews, and it's all great. But this adds another layer of validation, right? So it goes beyond just understanding that maybe the target acquisition has specific security controls, to detect and maybe prevent, to limit the impact of ransomware, whatever it may be. However, nothing in that interview process actually puts it to the test. So being able to use the platform here to drop a few simulators and run the attack scenarios to sort of like spot check on the responses, I think is something that we do well. Customers use this. It's definitely something that you can use to maybe change the discussion at a higher level, maybe even negotiations and how much that target acquisition comes in at from a dollars perspective, just because of the risk that you might be taking on.
We have a question here. What percentage of attack simulation coverage is available compared to MITRE ATT&CK? It's fortunate you actually asked this question right now, because we just received data this morning from our research and development team. So as you know, the MITRE ATT&CK framework is it's large, it's varied, and not everything maps to TTPs analysis. Some of them, a good chunk might be associated with vulnerabilities. We don't support all of the vulnerabilities on there, but the critical ones we do add support for. But as of this morning, our effective MITRE coverage is cover 263 of the 374 attacks listed. So 70.32% is where we provide coverage for.
Yeah, and actually, if you go to title security, title keeps track of the different vendors in the industry and what techniques and sub techniques are being covered. You can look at Safe Breach's coverage there, as well as an independent sort of third party validating our coverage for attack.
And I do want to add that this update, the one that you see on title, it will not highlight, at least as of today. It won't show today's newly added coverage, but if you look at it in a week or so, it will highlight that update as well. The next question we have here is, can this be used to compare security controls of different types simultaneously, or can it be only done one security control at a time, the comparison?
No, it can be of different types. So as I mentioned, the dashboards are highly flexible. So if I go back to my security posture dashboard, which is effectively tracking risk across different business units, I can begin to adjust the widgets individually to show anything I want. So for example, if we're focused on different security controls, I can just split my visualization here, my donut, excuse me, and I can select security controls. So security control product, security control category, really anything. So it can be a network, it can be an endpoint, it could be just straight up auditing. So there's nothing here that limits, what you can visualize. All can be filtered, of course. I can begin to focus on endpoints, or I can use a full kill chain, which has different vectors: drive-by downloads, initial phishing attack vector, or remote exploitation, web application attacks. So I'm not really limited to one vector or one control category. I can look at it across the board.
Thanks, Francisco. It just reminds me, and this kind of sounds like more of an off-the-cuff question for you, Francisco. Can they create, say, groups of security controls? And just here's just an example. If I were to combine, say, the XDR with a checkpoint firewall, and compare it against Defender and checkpoint firewall, or have sorts of like groups of security controls, can they be compared?
Yeah, you could do that. So I can add a filter here at the top or at the individual widget level, and I can actually do this by control product vendor rather. So I can do it by vendor instead of by product. And so now I can choose, say, Microsoft as the vendor, right? And now I'm looking at my Microsoft stack, or I can choose Palo Alto as my vendor. And now I'm looking at my Palo Alto stack. So different views. And if you're providing this report maybe to the security endpoint control owners or to the network security team, you might want to use different filters to keep the focus on what they're able to adjust and report on.
So that's about all the questions that we had for today's webinar. So again, thank you so much, Francisco, for taking the time to walk us through the demo and answer all our questions. And thank you to all the attendees who took the time for attending the webinar and asking questions. If at any given point of time you do need additional information, please do fill out, go to our website and fill out our request additional information or request a demo. We'll be more than happy to answer all your questions in a much more detailed demo for you. With that being said, thank you again to everyone who attended, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.